Today, we're making one of the all-time great comfort foods, broccoli cheese soup. This is actually from food.com. I'll put the link down below. And it's actually a copy of a famous chain out there called Panera Bread. Hopefully there's some of those around by you. And here it is. It starts with something that many people might find intimidating, and that is something called a roux. But I'm going to show you how it's not really something that you should be intimidated by. So we're going to start with half an onion, as per the recipe. So the way that I kind of break down my onions is I lop off the top, and then lop off the bottom or the root end, and then I just slice it in half. Now this soup is actually going to be something that we're going to puree at the end, so I'm not going to be too particular about how I slice this onion. I'm just kind of peeling off the skin there. If you want to do something, let me get a towel here to clean my knife. But I'll kind of show you here the basic technique if you don't know how to break down an onion. So I'm gonna go for a small dice, put my hand over the top, right? So I'm not gonna slice up my fingers. And then I'm gonna make two cuts, hopefully kind of equidistant apart. I'm gonna use my guide hand, my left hand here. I'm gonna slice down, and I'm gonna make, you know, 1/4 inch or so slices in the onion. Doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, it's going into a soup. It's gonna cook down a lot, and then we're actually gonna puree most of it, so it'll cover up any mistakes we make here. So got this kind of rough dice going here. I'm gonna clean up the end. Like I said, I'm going slow so you can kind of see that basic technique. So there's our onion for the recipe. Now I have a nice heavy cast iron pot here. You don't have to use cast iron. This is what I have laying around. So, but basically a nice, you know, wide, deep soup or stock pot will do for this recipe. It is going to be quite a bit of liquid. So I'm going to turn this onto a medium heat. I'm going to start with my butter here. So I'm actually using a couple of different butters just because I have this half stick that I want to use up. But the recipe calls for 1/4 stick plus 1 tablespoon. So that's basically 4 tablespoons plus an extra tablespoon. So unsalted butter there that I typically use for baking. And this is the salted butter that I would typically like put on toast or something in the morning. So we need about another tablespoon of that. So I'm just gonna let that melt down. Put my butter back in the fridge. And while we're waiting for that to melt down, let's talk about a roux. So a roux is basically, you have a fat, in this case we're using butter, and then you have to have some kind of a starch, and typically flour, so that's what we have over here. So we have our butter, we have our flour, which is our starch, and then in this recipe, kind of to combine 2 steps into one, it recommends sauteing your onion and butter, removing that onion, and then making some additional fat addition, which is that 1/4 cup of butter, and then adding in your starch and creating this roux. I'm kind of simplifying things here so we don't have to do as many steps and can kind of speed this thing up. So the butter's still melting, but we got enough fat across the bottom of the pot here. And this is cast iron, so it does take a minute to heat up. It's not quite as fast as if it was like an aluminum pan. But that's okay, because when we start making the roux here, it actually really helps out in creating a nice kind of even brown with our roux. So when we're talking about roux, there's 3 basic levels. There's like a light roux or a blonde, and then there's like a medium, kind of like a pale blonde to a golden, and then there's a dark roux. And so in specifically Louisiana style cooking, you're going to use those different types of roux with different recipes. For this recipe, we're talking about a broccoli cheese soup. You can get away with the blonde. This recipe actually recommends going to kind of like a light maybe golden, deep blonde kind of state with that roux. So that's what we're gonna do here. You basically get a little bit more flavor, a little more nutty tones out of that butter and that fat. And all I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna cook these onions, and I'm gonna cook them down into their kind of translucent, slightly cooked, and then I'll see you guys when it's time to add in our starch, which is the flour. Okay, so we got our onions slightly softer now. Some of them are starting to go a little bit translucent, so it's soft enough now. It's to that point to where we can add our starch. So flour just goes right in. And this is 1/4 cup all-purpose flour. And basically all we're gonna do is, you see our butter's getting nice and foamy. We're just gonna stir this in. And this is really crucial. You may wanna take your heat down just a tad at this point. And we're gonna stir it in. And if you're making a light roux, all you have to do is basically cook this down for maybe 1-2 minutes just to get that raw flour flavor out of there. But we're gonna go a little bit beyond that. We're gonna kind of go for, you know, a lighter kind of blonde, light amber roux. So I'm just gonna continue to stir this because at this point this is really kind of crucial that you don't want to end up with burned bits, because those burned bits will taste like burned bits in your soup. And you can kind of already see that nice color, because as we were cooking these onions in the butter was already starting to get kind of toasted. And remember, color equals flavor. And this is really all there is to it. You just have to watch your fat to starch ratio and continue to stir. And if you have a nice light colored pot like this, it actually really helps. If I was doing this like in a black bottom pot, it would be much harder to kind of tell how dark my roux was getting. But since this is like a nice kind of like lighter cream color, it's much easier to kind of contrast that against the color of this roux to see how dark it's getting. And since you are standing here just kind of stirring it all the time, it may seem like nothing's happening and it's not really getting that much darker, but believe me, it is. I can already tell it's quite a bit darker here than when we started. And when you first put that flour in there and start to stir it up, you're gonna smell that kind of smell of like raw flour, kind of raw dough. And as you cook it down more and more, it's gonna start to develop kind of a more and more complex flavor or aroma, I guess, coming off of this. So I'm gonna kind of check my flame here. I got a little bit too low. So you just want to kind of make sure that you see that foaming, that constant foaming of the butter. Then again, stirring it just so we're not getting any scorched spots. And I'm going to take this all the way with you guys. So why make a roux in the first place besides flavor? I don't think I talked about that yet. The roux is actually going to serve as a thickener for our soup. So if you like those nice, thick, kind of creamy soups that have incredible mouthfeel, right? Those kind of, especially like, you know, comfort soups, winter comfort kind of soups, a roux is a great way to go because it's going to build a lot of flavor, and it's also going to act as your thickener for the soup as well. That's what that flour is going to do. There's other ways to thicken a soup, and I'll have another video coming up soon of how to kind of do a quick soup, or at least maybe slightly quicker than this, where you don't have to make a roux and stand here and stir kind of constantly. But if you like to make soups, comment below and tell me what your favorite kind of soup is. Maybe I can put up a video of some versions of that. So look at that. You can kind of see it's sort of, it's really foamy, but you can kind of see it's taking on like a darker blonde, almost light amber color now. So we've definitely cooked all the raw flavors out of the flour, and we're really starting to develop those richer tones in this roux. So I'll let this go for like another maybe 30 seconds or so, and then we'll start adding our liquid, which in this case is 2 cups of chicken broth, and you're going to want to use low sodium. So why low sodium? Well, you can always add more salt, but you can't really take it out. So using a low sodium chicken broth is going to allow you to really dial in that salt content on whatever you're using it in. So the important thing here, and I'm liking this color, it's this really darker blonde, lighter kind of amber. And I'm going to start adding in my liquid. And I'm going to do this a little bit at a time. And you're going to see the tendency when you start adding in liquid is for stuff to clump together. You're going to start noticing it getting really thick all of a sudden. So I'm going to add a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that I'm stirring completely and getting all of that liquid incorporated. So what would happen if I didn't? As you can see it really clumping together now, right? So if I was just to add all of this liquid all at once, all of these clumps would never get incorporated. You'd have a really lumpy, not appealing soup. So you have to add this just really kind of slowly. And I'm probably adding maybe 1/8 of a cup or so at a time. I'm going to make sure I have my heat kind of dialed back up a little bit here. So this is kind of the most crucial part of the whole deal, besides not burning the roux in the first place. And don't be intimidated by this. I mean, this is not, it's not rocket science, right? You just add a bit of liquid, stir it until you don't see clumps of stuff and liquid separated. Stir it until it's all like homogeneous. And then add some more liquid. Right? See that, how it kind of looks all separated out? And I'll just continue to stir until it all looks homogeneous again, right? So most recipes will call for using a whisk. As you can see, I'm not using a whisk. I'm using a wooden spoon. It's gonna be fine. As long as you go slow in this step right here of incorporating your liquid into the roux, whatever that liquid is, right? You'll be fine. And this is the base. You can see, like, look at those nice kind of golden bits of onion. I mean, all that nice color. You can see the color of the soup. That's all flavor. And the great thing, you know, about using a cast iron like this is that it retains heat so well. As you can see, like, I'm adding this liquid. Typically, like, if you're making a roux like this, you know, if you're doing a risotto, you'd have another pot going off on the side on a slow simmer, ladling in your hot liquid, because you wouldn't really want to add cold liquid to your roux. But that's exactly what I'm doing. This is coming straight out of the fridge. This was in the fridge. So that's the kind of magic of cast iron, to be able to hold that heat in. And you see we're already starting to bubble. So you see, look how like silky and glossy that is. And you have those chunks of onion in there. You know, don't worry, this is not a perfectly like smooth. We're not going for some like you know, crazy French soup here. This is going to be a hearty cheddar and broccoli cheese soup. So it's going to have some character to it, but it will be silky smooth. So almost done here. So about another 1/8 of a cup or so left of broth to go. And as you get to these final stages like this, you can kind of add a little more liquid at a time. And I'm gonna add this last little bit. Now that we have this incorporated, make sure I see a couple of bubbles there. Add in that last bit. Make sure that becomes incorporated. And then I'll put the lid on here in a minute and kind of let this guy go for maybe 10-15 minutes, just to make sure that we have everything heated all the way through and everything's had a chance to evenly thicken up. So let's see if we got this all incorporated. All right, we got a slow kind of bubble there. So I'm going to turn this down to a more of a medium low. Put the lid on, and I'm going to stir this every 3 to 4 minutes for about the next 15 to 20 minutes, just to make sure we have our base sauce really nice and thick. You can see it kind of coats that spoon nicely. And before I actually add in our vegetable, I'm going to kind of season this up a bit. So nutmeg. This is one of my favorite comfort food spices. This is actually, I believe if you buy nutmeg in the store in the US, it's just the inner part of this kind of nut or seed that we have here. And the outer part, this skin, is called mace. So I believe if you bought just nutmeg in a jar at the store, you'd only get this inner part. You wouldn't get this outer skin, which actually I think contributes a lot of character. So it's something that can kind of be interchangeably used with pepper, and I'm actually going to use some black pepper as well. So this is just a microplane. If you don't have one, this is such a great tool to have around the kitchen. And you can kind of see, let me go a little bit further, as you get inside of this nutmeg, it almost looks like a burled walnut or something. You know, it's really, really kind of a beautiful thing. So I'm gonna go maybe, you know, a 1/4 teaspoon or so of this nutmeg in here. And this really, it's not something that you would necessarily actually like maybe pick out in the final product, but it's something that really starts to add in those layers and that depth of flavor into the soup. Just be careful not to shred your fingers. So I probably went about maybe that's like a 1/3 of that little nutmeg in there. I'm also going to do some pepper. Let's see here. Yes, here's the pepper. So maybe like, I don't know what that was, 12 turns or so. And oh, one more thing. The recipe doesn't call for it, but I always like a little hint of garlic in the background. And this is, again, my best friend, granulated garlic. Pick some up in your local bulk section. You can literally put it on anything. Vegetables, eggs, meat. So I'm going to stir all those kind of dry spices up, make sure they're well incorporated. And then I'll add my vegetables. So I'll start with the carrot. It doesn't really matter what order you do this in. We've got our carrot there. And then I'll get the broccoli there right on top. And remember, we already have some salinity in this soup from a little bit of the butter and then also the stock. And we just want to kind of stir this up, make sure that all the vegetables get a nice coating of this soup base. And I'm going to turn this back up to a medium because I'm going to start adding in some cold ingredients now. So first thing I'm going to do is 2 cups whole milk. All right, stir that up. Don't panic too much. I mean, this is stuff that you can do all at the same time, right? We've created this really solid base for the soup that's going to have some nice thickening to it. So I don't really have to worry about lumps or anything at this point. Okay. Now I'm going to add heavy cream. So the recipe calls for half and half. What half and half actually is, it's half whole milk and half cream. So, I don't know, for me, I always find that your soup is going to be much creamier and much smoother if you just use heavy cream versus using half and half. Sometimes I've had issues with having soups that turn out a little bit kind of, not lumpy, but sometimes the fat in half and half doesn't really fully incorporate into whatever the base of your soup is for some reason. I'm not sure if that has to do with the manufacturing process of the half and half, but it's happened to me a time or two. So again, comfort food, right? And this is not even counting all of the cheese we're going to add to this guy at the end. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir this until everything becomes heated through, because all of that came out of the fridge, so it's at 38 degrees. And then once it comes back up to temperature, I'm going to put the lid on and I'm going to let it simmer very, very slowly for the next 15 to 25 minutes, depending on the size of chunks that I cut my broccoli into. But I'm looking for that broccoli to get nice and tender, but I don't want it to be like total mush. But I do want a tender broccoli in this soup. So let's take a quick break and I will see you guys when this soup is ready to add the cheese. Alright, we're back. So let's check up on our soup. It's been about 20 minutes. So basically what we're looking for is that these broccoli are kind of getting nice and tender. Again, like we don't want them like be total mush, but they're kind of breaking apart fairly easily with this wooden spoon here. And so of course that means that our shredded carrot here is going to be not crispy anymore, but have a nice tenderness to it. We don't want that raw character in the vegetable in our soup. So what we'll do now is make sure this is on low. We're going to take this tool called the immersion blender. If you don't have one of these, you can definitely do this in a blender. You can do it in a food processor. You can actually do this like with a potato masher. So don't feel like you have to go out and buy a separate tool for this. But if you do have one of these guys, it does make this super handy. When I'm pureeing soups, and I don't want to puree them super fine, I make sure I put it on the lowest setting, which is a 1 on this guy. I'll take the handle, and we're getting a little bit hot, so let me grab a towel here. And you basically, if you're using an immersion blender to do this, you want to make sure that you're fully submerged when you're turning it on, right? And so, since I do have a 3-year-old at home, I want to make sure that I'm breaking up most of these bigger chunks of the broccoli. Just so she thinks it's just a nice cheesy soup, right? But really, you're getting a ton of vegetables in here. And I'm just kind of pulsing it, right? I don't want to really over mix this too much. I'm going to pulse it, kind of look for those bigger chunks, and then puree. And definitely I don't want to pull out while the motor is still on, because you're going to have scalding hot soup on you if you do that. So I'm pretty happy with that right now. And at this point, I mean, like, you have this nice creamy soup, but it's not cheesy yet. What kind of cheese are we going to add, you may ask? We have some Tillamook sharp cheddar. I'd recommend sharp cheddar for sure. It's going to give you that nice kind of bite to it. You could use a mild if you had to, but the sharp is really going to give you a bit of an extra character. We have yellow cheddar here. I've done this both with yellow cheddar and white cheddar. Color-wise, it's not going to really make a huge difference in your soup at the end, so it's really up to you what you have on hand. Tillamook, by the way, if you have not been there in Oregon, it's about, I think it took us maybe an hour and a half from Portland to get there, but they have a really cool tour, and they're known for their cheese, but let me tell you, their ice cream is amazing. So again, I have this on low. I want to give this a quick stir, make sure there's no real big chunks in here. Again, if it was for me and my wife, I'd probably leave this a bit chunkier, but you know, the kids gotta sneak those vegetables in. So what I'm going to do is kind of just add this in handfuls at a time, because I don't want to break the cheese, right? I want to get it nice and melted in here, but I don't want to separate out like the cheese, you know, fats, the cheese solids from the oil, right? If you've ever done that, You know what I'm talking about. So I'll stir it in, kind of make sure it's incorporated before I add in the next chunk. And this is, by the way, half a pound of cheese, 8 ounces. And then you can always reserve some or grate a little bit more so you have some for garnish as well. And this is great to serve over just about anything. I mean, one of my favorite things actually growing up was going to Jason's Deli and getting the broccoli cheese soup potato bowl. So if you want to make yourself a nice big baked potato, slice it open and ladle some of this over the top and then garnish with some cheese, go right ahead. You could do the whole bread bowl thing. I think that's what Panera does with theirs. Or you can just enjoy it by itself, right? If you want to get real fancy, you could go ahead and do some bacon. That would be definitely delicious if you're doing the potato version of this. Chive, scallion for the topping. That would all work as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of this in here. Don't want to miss any of that cheese. So at this point, you can see how nice and kind of thick that is, right? Now, since we have everything now completely blended together, we have the cheese melted. I'm going to kill the heat. And then I'm actually going to kill the fan. And now I'm going to taste it for seasoning. Because guess what? I haven't added any salt to this point. Extra, besides the salt that would naturally be in the cheese or the salt that would be in the low sodium chicken broth. So more than likely I may have to adjust that up a bit. So get a tasting spoon here. And this is really important. Like you want to taste your food. You want to make sure that it's seasoned. And by seasoned, what I mean is, what is that salt and pepper balance to the fat and the acid in your dish? Yeah, it's almost there, but you can really tell, or I can tell right now, that it needs some salt. And that salt is just going to make some of those flavors kind of pop. And it really needs just a little bit more salt in there. I'm going to add a little more pepper. I always like pepper. A little grade of some additional nutmeg. Oh my goodness. And look at that, we lost our nutmeg. Don't panic, don't panic. I found it. No problem. This is, this is cooking, no edits. This is what happens when you cook at home, right? Secret ingredient. White balsamic vinegar. So we got a lot of fat going on in here, right? We have cream, we have milk, we have the butter. We need a slight bit of acid. Oh, and the cheese too. We need a slight bit of acid to kind of balance that off a bit. So again, I'm going to go probably half a teaspoon there. Doesn't seem like a lot, but along with that salt, it's really going to make those flavors pop. So let's make sure we get this all stirred in here. Oh, I don't see any more of that nutmeg or the pepper on the top here. Okay. Let's take my second tasting spoon and see where we're at. Yeah, it just needed that little bit of salt, a little bit of acid, and now that's perfect. All right, so let me know if you guys make this at home. Please comment, like below, and I'd love to see your results. Until next time.